Hey, it's your boy Ike. I'm here with a plasticity tutorial. This is a program that I'm relatively new in, so I'm not pretending to be an expert. This exercise is for creating a cassette, music cassette from way back in the 80s, 90s. We'd call it a tape sometimes. And I wanted to challenge myself by creating a real world object in Plasticity and then exporting that out into a traditional 3D package like Blender. And so, I quickly moved through that process here. It's a time lapse, 9 times the speed for most of it. I'll slow it down if needed, but essentially, I'm assuming that you've used these programs before. If you haven't, there are great resources out there. I have another course where it's kind of more of an intro to plasticity. Check that out, or check out Pixel Fondue and Ben Fry, I believe is his name. Anyways, there's some good stuff out there. So we're just going to go ahead and jump on into it. So if you're not familiar, but you do know Blender, a lot of the keyboard shortcuts translate. So let's do this. Okay, so first you're going to want to grab some reference material, and I'm keeping mine off to the side. I use PureRef to keep all that stuff straight. I looked up the dimensions of a cassette so that when I draw out a rectangle, I can go into the numerical values and make it real world scale. And then you're just going to want to extrude that out, grab the edges of each 4 corners, and then bevel or chamfer those. And I'm eyeballing it for the most part as far as thickness. You can key in the actual values. Here I'm projecting a rectangle onto the sides to create the little nub on either side of the cassette. And then, just referring to my reference, pulling edges to get the correct shape. Now, I'm not working in mirror mode. I, to be honest, don't know if it's possible to have live mirroring inside of Plasticity. I should probably Google it. I haven't figured it out yet. But at some point, I slice this model down in half so that I'm only working on one side, and then I get it to a certain place and mirror it over and blend it together. It's a lot of the same steps here, create additional rectangles, round the corners, project those shapes onto the surface, imprint them, I believe they call it, is one way to do it. I ended up extruding these and then select both of the pieces that I want to cut out, and subtracted those from the main body of the cassette. Now at this point I've drawn another rectangle, and I'm going to use this as a cutter. So just go ahead and project that onto the model. And at first I tried doing project curve, but that actually just makes a curve that's stuck to the model. But yeah, you want to imprint that shape onto it so that it actually creates cuts in it. And then it's just a matter of extruding those out, beveling them. And again, we're constantly looking at the reference key when you're building something existing. Now, you could have 4 different views of the thing and have them in your program and work over top of those. Some people like to do that. I find this funner, maybe. But if you really are creating something needs to be absolutely exact, then yeah, you might want to do it the other way, or really be careful about your exact measurements. But the only reason I'm worried about scale here is for the final render, so that the lighting and textures work right and I don't have to you know, guess and fudge a bunch of stuff. So this point, you know, the bottom of the cassette has openings, and so I'm just extruding each of those pieces out, and then I'll subtract them from the main body of the cassette. And you can try to bowl them all together as one union object, or just subtract one at a time. And then select the individual faces and delete those. And again, you know, I haven't tried it, but Blender, you hit X and that deletes it, so that may be the case here. Or you can just click the delete icon. You know, and if you embed multiple kind of 2D shapes within each other, or you stack them on top of each other, they kind of automatically work as shape cutters. And so as you hover over it with the face tool, you'll see that just the one polygon or shape will be selected, and so you can use these as tools to figure out what you want. There you can see I finally cut the cassette in half, and then ran into some issues. It wasn't quite cutting cleanly, so I had to go merge some solids together to ensure that I got one clean cut through the whole thing. And you know, a cassette is made up of two halves that are screwed together, or you know, plastic welded together. And so that's why in this model you can see that I've got it in two halves. Now they're not equal halves, one is much smaller than the other, thinner. So just trying to be as realistic as possible without obsessing over it. And you know, some things I'm able to see from my reference, others I kind of guess at, or I remember holding it in my hand, you know, what was the thickness of the pressed sheets of plastic that make up each of these halves. And later on, when I get into Blender, you'll see that there are some things that I should have done at this plasticity stage and didn't. And so I find myself kind of, you know, extruding and mirroring and slicing and all kinds of a mess to clean it up. But it's not that big a deal. I get kind of dramatic sometimes. So now, you know, you can see I'm just focusing on this one half, but it was handy to you know, not just start with a half, have the whole thing, because then you can look at it as a whole. Is this generally the right size? As I start to put other pieces in there, poke holes into it, does it still feel and look like a cassette? That's important, and something you might not be able to see if you're just working on one half. But pick your poison, because you can work on one half, and then once you mirror it, then make those adjustments and eyeball it or use exact measurements at that point. And then I'm always thinking about, in real life, you know, which pieces are fused together and part of one material and which pieces are separate. And so generally, if you can think of it in that way, then come time to apply materials and stuff, the better, because you can see that floating cubic rectangle there, which is the clear plastic. It allows you to see through the cassette and kind of get an idea of how much of the reel is on one side of the cassette versus the other. And here I am talking about how a cassette works, which I guess is applicable, but that's not why you're here, right? So again, you know, creating some shapes that I'm going to use to Boolean out these different pieces. The two cylinders on the right, they go all the way through. The one in the middle is just a screw, so you only see it on one side of the cassette. So you got to keep an eye on that kind of stuff, so you're not poking through where you don't need to. And then here, it's the same type of thing. I, you know, created that little circle, imprinted, you know, the shape onto the cassette body itself, but then left these little floating pieces, which are the same size, which will be the screw heads. I don't need to build the whole screw, just the head, because we're not gonna ever animate this as a exploded view and have to see the full screw. If you were, then you'd want to do that. But we just want this to be a separate piece and for it to be a convincing screw head. So that's what we're doing there. And you know, at this point you might be thinking, hey, this looks like a cassette. I think we're about done here. But you'd be wrong, because there's some innards, you know. I'm going in and creating really subtle fillets or bevels. I think I was calling them chamfers earlier, but it's fillets in this tool, which I just love the way Plasticity and other CAD models are just so good at these. You know, you've got these hard surfaces stuck to what would be giant n-gons in some other tool, and then you're able to create this perfect reverse fillet or bevel that makes it look like it's been molded. It's a molded piece right out of the side of that thing. But you're always going to want some kind of fillets on your shapes, on your edges, because nothing's perfectly laser sharp. Very few things. Here I am working on this screw head some more, you know, subtracted away a cross shape that, you know, looks pretty decent to me. I think at some point, I don't know, I don't remember if I recorded it or I did it afterwards. I made that smaller after looking at my reference a little more closely. That what I have here is a little big. And here I go, I'm starting on the innards. So I grabbed a circle shape right in the center of one of those holes in the cassette body, and I'm just starting to build out, you know, what is the hub of the kind of reel-to-reel within the cassette, where one tape moves to the other, and just kind of building that out. And this is actually a fun and challenging piece to build. You know, you can see lots of different shapes being used. And then here, you know, I'm duplicating, and I maybe could have done this with an array of some sort, but I decided to just do it manually so that I could get these little holes that are punched out of little windows in this hub. And I noticed that depending on the manufacturer of the cassette, these were different, and so I picked one that I thought was cool looking and went with it. And it may not even be exactly like one that actually exists. Now here I actually do use the radial array to get the little nubs for lack of a better term, that, you know, that kind of creates a gear for the cassette player to grab onto and turn these different hubs. So, and then it's just a matter of duplicating and copying the other one over. And then you can see I grabbed the exterior extrude it out so that we have a separate piece that represents the tape, right? The big reels of tape, and I make one bigger than the other as far as diameter. So when you export the OBJ, you got to be thinking, like, a lot of times I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be subdivision surface, and so I want the minimal number of points, vertices, polygons for this type of a model where it's hard surface, static. It doesn't need to be a subdivision surface. So when you export this, you want to make sure that your surface angle tolerance, but you'll see as you make changes, your preview there in the light blue will change, and so you'll see that, oh, there's a lot more information, geometry there, which is going to give you smoother transitions. But then in the big flat areas, there's still big pieces, which is perfect. That way your model is dense in the areas it needs to be and not in the areas it doesn't. So that's what you want to pay attention to. And there I go. I'm previewing it in Mac Preview real quick, and I didn't catch this initially, but as I was rotating it, you could see some holes in the geometry, which basically meant that the faces, the normals are off. So, you know, you'd want to unify those. And this is what I was talking about before, you know, in looking more closely at my reference, I saw that, oh, these pieces, these internal pieces aren't as loosely floating in there as they look, and that actually the case itself probably is molded in a way to help secure and keep things in position. So I had to extrude several pieces in, and then I worked to slice the thing in half using the bisect tool in Blender. But because we have such high geometry on the edges, it's a little difficult when I go to merge them together. I've got to get in real close. There's some pieces that were kind of overlapping and need to be moved, and so you can see I only mirror and rejoin it once because it was kind of a pain. And so again, if I were a thinking man, I probably would have said, okay, we're going back to plasticity, let's make some of these changes and then we'll bring it into Blender again. But instead I'm like, no, we'll just let it fly, we'll let it roll, right? Because maybe that's what you signed up for. You know, you want to see this dude's approach, and you may run into such an issue, and then now you've seen it both ways. You know, how it's done in plasticity, how it's done in Blender. Pick your poison. Pick your poison. So again, because I'm extruding certain pieces, and in some cases I decided not to extrude it, I just kind of created cylinders that I could put real closely to the other geometry and extrude it out, and, you know, try the different smoothing features as you right click to see what looks best. So yeah, and then I think ultimately I ended up doing a little bit more than what's shown here, but I was ready to throw some materials on this bad boy. So first thing I like to do is go get myself an HDRI, working in the world material right now. You know, Polyhaven is a great place to grab free HDRIs. They used to be so expensive and so hard to get a hold of, and it was a mess. And so thankful to those kind of resources. And then, you know, what color do you want your cassette to be? Do you want it to be transparent, translucent, opaque? That's the fun. You get to play with it. And you know, I'm zooming through all these materials. You can stop and pause it and see my kind of node tree and decide if you want to do it exactly like I did it or do it your own self, which is fine. And then once you're happy with just kind of the blank cassette tape and all the little materials on there, then you could, if you'd like, do what I did in the thumbnail artwork. I threw a label on there. I decided not to include that process in this video, but if that's something you want to see, how I did it, or whatever, drop me a comment. You know, don't be afraid to follow the channel so you'll see when that surfaces, but I'll get it out real quick if I get enough comments, people telling me that's what they want to see. But that's something that I think there's a lot of good resources out there, so I decided to skip it, but happy to cover it if you the people want it. And creating materials like this in the node tree a lot of times is just, it's time to experiment, time to explore. You know, let's add this node in, let's move this lever, whatever. So there it is, my quick tutorial on my process, and I'm sure there are better ways, but it does the job. And you saw from beginning to end, essentially, a couple of my mistakes I left in there as well. But get in there, do you some learning. You've done that. Now learn from doing. Get into plasticity. Give it a try. Thanks a lot.